Ari Lewis Show.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Ari Lewis Show here on Israel Sports and News Radio. Thank you for joining us. At any time, you can email the program, arilewishow@hotmail.com, or you can email the station, Israel Sports News Radio, at gmail.com. A lot of great news in the boxing world. Will Manny and Floyd get it on again? Who is Canelo going to fight? And also, of course, will Conor McGregor step in the boxing ring and put up his dukes? On the line right now, the author of the Dono Diaries, as well as the creator of the film Split Decision, also consistent writer for ESPN, and he is Israel Sports and News Radio's boxing correspondent. Back to the program, Brin-Jonathan Butler. Brin, how you doing out there?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Doing excellent. So let's first get into Canelo's win. He beats Amir Khan. A lot of people were surprised by that, but Vegas odds, many Vegas odds had Canelo as the winner. Were you shocked by his knockout, or not so much considering his youth and punching power?
Well, and the weight issue for Khan to move up from a natural 147 up to 155, I think, he was able to do what he said, which was outbox Canelo, and then on the other side of things, Canelo was able to do what most people predicted, which is have a punch that Amir would not be able to withstand, especially so with the added weight behind it. So I was really impressed with Khan's fortitude, and that he fought to win the fight, and he was doing well. But in the end, one clean punch from Canelo, it was just a devastating, iconic knockout of the year, maybe one of the best knockouts that Canelo's ever had. And I think it really sent a message as kind of an antidote in the sport to what that taste that was left in the mouth after Pacquiao Mayweather of, wow, we could be in for a super fight that pretty much has to be exciting if Golovkin is next.
Well, that's what a lot of the fans want. Do you think that's what's going to happen, or does Canelo fight a setup fight before that, maybe draws more attention? What do you think will happen with Canelo's next opponent?
Well, I think there are two things that are interesting. One is that Canelo had Golovkin in the front row. Then he also invited him into the ring. And then he further said, with Oscar De La Hoya behind him, that the weight issue was no longer a concern in terms of insisting that Golovkin come down to 155-pound catch weight to fight him. He agreed to fight him at the 160-pound middleweight limit. So all the impediments that were there are now gone, ostensibly, at least as far as the end of the Khan fight. He's riding high after the big knockout victory. Now what's left is, politically, Oscar De La Hoya only has the one star, who is the biggest star in the sport. Does he want to jeopardize that cash cow position for Canelo by having him fight somebody who's bigger, somebody who likely would have every advantage in a fight? I don't know if he's willing to do it. They're certainly talking the talk. We're just going to see if probably a September date is when it should happen. They've certainly done everything to stack the deck in terms of fans' expectations that they want it to happen. Now, the big question is, can boxing and these people produce it? Because it's very clear this is the fight that everybody wants, and the whole idea of, to use Bob Aaron's term, marinating this fight is just going to piss a lot of people off.
Right. I mean, hopefully fans will learn from the Floyd-Manny thing. Just because you wait for something doesn't make it better. What type of money would this do if it happens in September between these two fighters?
I think it certainly is the biggest fight that boxing has to offer by a stretch. So, I mean, is anything going to, get 4.6 million pay-per-view buys at $100? No. I mean, nothing's going to surpass that for a long time. I think what's particularly exciting is their styles mesh so well together. Maybe this is a rivalry that could produce a rematch or a trilogy. Then you're looking at it maybe transcending the sport and just boxing fans to just sports fans in general. I don't know if it does that right away. I think it certainly has the potential to, because Canelo brings in, a massive boxing demographic with the Mexican community. Golovkin still is not that transcending star, but he's making strides to do so. He is connecting with a lot of people. He's exciting a lot of people. I mean, he knocks out 95% of everybody he fights, and he wants to fight everybody. So he's also half Korean. So, I mean, potentially maybe he can appeal to that Asian demographic that Pacquiao was able to tap into so enormously with his own success and popularity. So I think there's a lot of potential there. It's just what is going to be the great storyline. We know that the fight itself will be fantastic, unlike Pacquiao-Mayweather. But Pacquiao-Mayweather had this great story leading into it for a lot of people. I don't know that this has it yet. It just has what everything points to would be a tremendous fight.
That's for sure, and a trilogy between those two fighters would be great for the sport. Let's move on to Money Mayweather for a few reasons. Before we get to his actual boxing, let's talk about his quote-unquote promotion company, Mayweather Promotions. Interesting story that Richard Schaefer, who used to work for Golden Boy Promotions, may work for Mayweather Promotions. I want to know if you think that's going to happen. Is that kind of a stab at Oscar De La Hoya for the way Richard Schaefer left that organization?
I think it would certainly be interpreted that way by Oscar De La Hoya. Everybody that I know in boxing has tremendous respect for Schaefer's abilities within the sport and thought that he was the real brains behind Oscar. To Oscar's credit, I think he's done a good job on his own, though. I think he's surprised a lot of people, but I don't know anybody that doesn't, think that Schaefer is a real player. And, to Mayweather's credit, nobody's been able to promote better than he has with his own career. What has amounted to one pretty profoundly disappointing fight after another, but it's never cost him in terms of the money that he's been able, those checks he's been cashing, it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. I don't know that he's ever going to be able to get a 9-figure check again, like he said would be necessary for him to step back into the ring again. But I don't know what Mayweather's been able to accomplish promoting anybody other than himself either. So there are some question marks, but there's also a pretty impressive track record between the two of them if they want to work together. It's just a question of where is the talent and where is the story behind the fighters that they would want to promote. I don't see that at present. So that seems where it's at right now.
This Mayweather's promotion story, whatever you want to call it, I find it fascinating because when Floyd went to prison back in summer 2012, that apparently ignited a feud between himself and 50 Cent because he thought 50 Cent should run the company, agreed to, and then there apparently wasn't really a company. This is one of the stranger things you can't really figure out in boxing, Mayweather Promotions. What exactly goes on there? I mean, like you said, they really haven't promoted top-quality fighters. Does Floyd do any work? Does he go to an office and talk with people? Does anything actually happen with Mayweather Promotions?
Well, if he does, I don't know anybody who's ever mentioned it to me.
This is an enigma,
Yeah, there's just no indication. I mean, where is the fruit of all that labor? It's just not clear. Where did 50 Cent go with him getting involved in boxing, picking up Gamboa and I think a couple other fighters? Similarly, Jay-Z invested a lot of money to get into boxing. Where are the fruits of that? I mean, what's Al Heyman and PBC getting boxing back on TV? What has it really done for the good of the sport? The sport doesn't seem any healthier as a result of any of these massive investments of resources. So I think I think it's pretty basic. It's just fans want to see the best people fighting each other, like they get in the UFC. What the fighters themselves don't want, as is the case in the UFC, is to create mega events. There does have to be some careful stewardship of these careers to allow a build-up of a narrative and some tension. And the UFC has not been able to deliver those fights, those mega fights, like you saw with Pacquiao-Mayweather, which I totally agree with you, should have happened 5 years before it did. But the reason you get those massive explosions of money and interest and it just being bigger than all sport for a limited time is because boxing does allow these guys to have a run of winning a lot of fights and putting together a highlight reel and then building up another fighter where people start talking. So where has Mayweather done it with anybody else? I haven't seen it. I mean, any of the fighters' names that he's mentioned, I've never heard of, let alone am I excited to see them in the ring, let alone am I hearing about any rivalries that are in the future that could develop. The people who've done that, have been the Bob Arums and the Don Kings and that sort of thing. So I think fighters have been pleased with what Heyman has done because he's got them so much money. But boxing fans have been really put off that after a year of having boxing on mainstream network television, what are the great fights that are indelibly seared in the memory of fans? They're not there. They've been lining the pockets of fighters, fighting relatively easy fights. But the big fights that people want to see are kind of what people are the lingering memories for fight fans of, oh, why didn't Pacquiao happen 5 years ago? Why isn't a Golovkin and a Canelo fighting regularly? Because in the 1980s, all the top guys were fighting each other quite regularly. So what's changed? And it's just the business of the sport getting in the way of what fans love about it.
Again, this is the Ari Lewis Show here at Israel Sports News Radio, talking boxing with Brin-Jonathan Butler. Again, sticking with Floyd Mayweather, especially when you see Manny Pacquiao do pretty well against Timothy Bradley, knocking him down twice. Talk, again, is about the rematch. We know Floyd most likely won't stay retired. He talked about he likes the idea of getting win number 50 and the money. So are we going to see that? That's what fans want to know next. Is that rematch between these two guys going to happen?
I mean, that's where the most money is, so I think that there's a tremendous amount of incentive for both of them to fight again because, as you saw with Pacquiao fighting Bradley or Mayweather having his last fight against Berto, both of those were massive pay-per-view disappointments. On their own, they can't draw much fans, even in the boxing community. So they kind of need each other for that big fight. Mayweather might go fighting Danny Garcia, another undefeated fighter. I think he could still dominate that fight if he's anywhere near to the level that he was with his last fight. I think fans would love to see him step in the ring with Golovkin, but he already sort of threw that away, saying Golovkin should move up. He's too big for me. I struggle to make 154. So I think Mayweather is in it for the same thing he's always been in the sport for, which is to make out as well as he can for himself, and has absolutely no interest in the welfare of the sport. Pacquiao, I think, just got elected to the Filipino Senate, so there's going to be some logistical issues there with him staying as focused on boxing as he was, which even for the last several years has been a little bit tenuous with all the distractions. But I think there's a good possibility of that fight happening just because there's so much money to be made still. It's still the biggest fight that boxing can make. And I don't really know where Pacquiao can go because other than fighting Mayweather, I don't know that there's any real money that can be made for anybody promoting his fights. I think he made $20 or $25 million to fight Bradley, and that fight probably was a loss for the promoters who put it on.
Also, he looked tremendous in that fight, so Pacquiao's probably thinking, I worked so hard to get $25 million, I could work maybe the same amount or a little more and get 100 plus. If that were to happen, I doubt that the money would be $250 and $120 like last year. What would the money be at for each fighter if it happens again?
I don't think it could be anywhere close to that because, whatever the pay-per-view money is, it's 4.6 million buys at $100 each. I mean, it's $460 million, and then you cut that in half in terms of the way it's distributed with the big networks putting it on and that kind of thing. So there has to be money in the pot for everybody to make out well, which means that, I realistically, I don't know about you, but I can't see it doing even half those numbers. If it did $2.5 million, I would be surprised. I guess it would do in the neighborhood of $2 million. The big issue, the big question mark is what can Pacquiao do without a shoulder injury? I agree that it was a very impressive performance he put on against Bradley, but I don't think Mayweather has any interest whatsoever in fighting him in an engaging way. So I guess the other question mark on Mayweather's side is, has he deteriorated enough with his layoff that he's slowed down so that Pacquiao could catch up to him? I wouldn't see that as a likely scenario, so I could see it being quite, another sort of, I think Freddie Roach made this point with fighting, sparring with Mayweather's uncle, that I've already done my road work for the day, so why do I need to spar with you? And with Mayweather, that's an even more extreme scenario, as it just looks like he's doing road work against his opponents and just flicking a jab and a counter right hand now and again. So, yeah, I think it would suffer a lot from what it was at its peak. in May of 2015.
Great line from Freddie Roach. And you talk about Mayweather's punching. I mean, he won that fight last year with approximately 12 landed punches per round, which is really nothing for most championship fights. I want to go real quick to the shoulder situation because even though the fight was about a year ago, there's been a lot of information in the past year. What exactly happened? People trying to figure it out. Was his shoulder kind of injured and then got injured more in the fight because he kept missing Floyd? Or was it was flat out not usable, but he had to suck it up for the fight? I want now, looking back on it a year away from it, what do you think happened at the end of the day with Manny's shoulder?
Well, I mean, it's clear. I mean, he had an operation to deal with the issue, so it's clear something was, really wrong. There's no question that he had a serious injury that required a major operation. When it happened is another issue. How much did he conceal going into that fight? I think his sparring was closed off by Freddie Roach, so the media didn't really have access to watching him, to see if he was at his best. I was with him while he was doing road work and that kind of thing, but I never saw him spar. So I don't know how much the wool was pulled over the eyes of people who paid to see that fight and all the people who gambled on that fight, of course, who were furious that he signed off on his medical release saying that he was in 100% condition. So there definitely was a real issue with that shoulder. It's just a question of how much did anybody know about it at the time, and that's still a little amorphous even now.
And what was also confusing was Floyd's IV injection, which that was discovered about 4 months or so after the fight. I want to know, I mean, we've talked about on air, off the air, about steroids and Floyd's potential use of them. Was it pretty suspicious to you that he did something which was technically banned, but then they reversed it? It was a weird ruling. So if you just speak to that regarding Floyd's intakes of vitamins, quote unquote, through the IV situation.
Well, I mean, he had special treatments that allowed him to get an exemption for something that was not permitted by that commission. So Pacquiao was not permitted to take some legal precautions regarding his shoulder to get, I think it was injections to stabilize it going into the fight. But they were legal measures that Floyd's group objected to, and those objections were upheld so that, Pacquiao had to go into the ring without assistance that might have aided in a better performance, whereas Floyd gets a post facto sort of deferment from breaking the rules. There was no punishment whatsoever. So Thomas Hauser's article on that issue, a long article, but it was very poignant and it reverberated around the world with people objecting to not just what he did, but the complete lack of transparency about how he did it.
Yes, indeed. Pretty strange situation. And it's funny that the world's most financially rich event in sports history, and there's still so many question marks of what exactly happened in that event and surrounding that event. So pretty strange indeed. Again, this is the Ari Lewis Show on Israel Sports News Radio. We're chatting with Brin-Jonathan Butler about the status of boxing. And a little bit of UFC now mixes in, as, of course, many people know out in the world, there is a UFC gentleman that may step in the ring and take on Floyd Mayweather, and that, of course, is Conor McGregor, who has had some issues with Dana White, did not want to get involved with his promotional responsibilities, and he was cut from the big UFC event in the summer. There are now talks about him fighting Floyd. Brin-Jonathan Butler, why would a guy with little boxing experience want to get in the ring against perhaps the greatest pound-for-pound fighter of all time?
I think all either of them are interested in are the headlines they're making and creating a talking point that might reach people, that their careers wouldn't otherwise reach. It would prove absolutely nothing, just as it would prove absolutely nothing if Floyd fought him under MMA rules. It's just an apple and oranges contest that's just, to me, just a farce. I don't know what it would prove. I don't know why anybody would be interested in paying to watch it. It's just nonsensical, and embarrassing theater.
So do you
Even
think,
by boxing standards.
right, yeah, boxing certainly has that circus atmosphere, but do you think then that both fighters kind of somewhat got together, I don't know, maybe in person, but let's say over the phone, and said, let's pretend to start this rumor, kind of amp this up, get us attention? Do you think it went more in that direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's getting a fair amount of interest. So I don't think it's a bad plan for either of them. But I mean, we're back to that same issue of fighters doing things that are, and their promoters doing things that are good for themselves in terms of maximizing their earning potential. But I think it does a real discredit to the sport, to both of their sports, to create these scenarios that are just artificial rivalries. It doesn't prove anything to fight somebody in somebody else's sport. I mean, what was interesting about Michael Jordan playing baseball? Nothing, other than that it was Michael Jordan doing it, and it was just a complete farce.
Right. It certainly did not look too good. It wasn't good watching him. We kind of thought that he should obviously be in a different situation indeed. So last question before we let you go. At the end of the day, when you talk about Canelo Alvarez and Amir Khan and Floyd, one thing that stuck in my mind, I don't know if this, again, is not likely, but Floyd fought Canelo Alvarez in 2013. I mean, Floyd thoroughly dominated him, although one judge gave that a draw. Would there be any chance that those two would hook up? Let's say Manny is too busy with the Senate and is not interested for whatever reason, and Canelo's on the rise. Floyd, almost 40, maybe would not be as sharp as he was 3 years ago. What are your thoughts about that potential fight happening?
I think it's very possible. It'll be a very lucrative fight again. I think what Floyd is able to do now as the A side in all of his fights is really get these guys to drain themselves in weight, where just the weight itself, dictates the sort of quality of the fight. So that Canelo would have to kill himself to get down in weight, and Floyd would exploit every possible advantage if he took that fight using weight. And he'd have all the leverage to do so, because, I mean, Canelo could make an enormous payday for that fight. So it's definitely a possibility.
All right, well said. Again, this is the Ari Lewis Show here on Israel Sports News Radio. My guest has been Brin-Jonathan Butler. We've been discussing boxing and all the circus stuff around it. And Brin, tell everyone out there, tell my audience, where people could find more about you and about your work.
Well, the paperback of my Cuban memoir, The Domino Diaries, is out June 9th. So that's the next thing that's on the way. And there's an article at SB Nation about Obama's visit to Cuba, where he went to watch a baseball game with President Castro. So that article should be on the way in the next couple of weeks.
All right, good stuff. Always fun catching up. It's been too long since you've been on the program, but it's great every time I speak to you. So thank you so much for being on the show, and we will speak soon.
My pleasure. Talk soon.
All right, take care. Be well.